All right, y'all. First and foremost, give all praise, honor, and glory to the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the son of Hamashiach, who some call Yahweh Shai, Yeshua, Yehoshua. We mostly know as Jesus Christ. All right, this is part 2, talking about the Sadducees and the Pharisees, talking about how, some of the history, the 200 years missing between the Apocrypha and the quote-unquote Gospels, when Christ hit the scenes, just helping fill in the gaps of how these things came about. How did we get to the point of the Feast of Dedication, which, some of us, celebrating now, and some of us maybe celebrating later or have already celebrated. How do we get to the point of us conquering the Greeks, pushing the Greeks back, and getting to the point where we have Christ is born, and we have this Edomite king over Israel, being the king of the Jews, rebuilding our temple, and like how did all of this stuff happen? And if you haven't watched part 1, go watch part 1. If you into this kind of stuff, like, this ain't for everybody. All right, this is some boring stuff. But we gotta read some of this history and look some of this stuff up, and it goes a lot deeper than this. This is just a decent little article I found. I will link the article in the description. If but you can go deeper with a lot deeper with some of these things. These things are detailed by some historians a lot deeper. This is kind of like surface level stuff, but a lot of this stuff we have no idea about. I know coming in 6-7 years in, I had no idea about these things. You're not going to see this information watching camp videos and stuff like that. All right, Sadducees, Pharisees, the seeds of strife planted earlier took root as the Hasmonean. And again, this is part 2. We done ran through about half of the Hasmonean king Simon. Of course, Judah Maccabees died. Then we dealt with a little Simon. We dealt with a lot of a little John Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus. I don't know how to say it. Yeah, have grace with me. But we dealt with a few of them. Again, if you haven't watched part 1, watch part 1. All right, so part 2. It says the season of strife planted earlier took root as the Hasmonean era produced sacrilegious heirs and pitted Jew versus Jew in a bloody civil war. All right, the Sadducees, who were the heirs of the Hellenists, okay, the Sadducees, they wanted us to adopt the Greek culture. They were like the winning. They might have. No, I'm gonna stop. I don't know, but that phrase fits them. Winning Rome, that's what they was about, and about getting this money. Formed a very potent and powerful force in Jewish society, but they subscribed to a philosophy that was essentially non-Jewish to a Greek view of the world. The rabbis did not take it lying down. They understood that if the Sadducees prevailed, there would be no Jewish people. Therefore, Jewish history, throughout Jewish history, there have always been groups who arose to espouse some type of non-Jewish philosophy. And that they always been met with a great deal of antagonism. On the surface, it looked like the establishment had no tolerance for them. However, that would be a bad oversimplification, because these groups represented an ideological threat that put at risk the very survival of the Jewish people. The Jewish people could not have survived under the reign of the Sadducees. Indeed, the Sadducees themselves would cease to exist after Roman persecution. The only thing of theirs that has survived in that which was recorded by the Pharisees. It was as though an unseen hand came and erased them. In a final analysis, there's not an ideological connect to anything eternal. Rather, it was a non-ideology ideology coursed in flowery words and pledging alliance to some vague idea they call Judaism, changeable to whatever prevailing winds of culture would help them maintain and consolidate their status. All right, very important there. All right. They will pledge to anything or change to anything or any culture that will help them maintain and consolidate their status of wealth, power, and pleasure. Those were the Sadducees. And you see this clear in the text. We will see this story repeated over and over again in Jewish history. We will always see that the race is not for the swift nor the battle in the mighty. It will always look like traditional Judaism will be on the way out. It will always look like traditional Judaism will be on the way out. Yet somehow they will be the only ones who will survive. Alexander Jannaeus. All right, this is another. All right, this is another Hasmonean king. John Hyrcanus came under the influence of the Sadducees. We read a little about him in the first one. All right, but this is going to lead us into the Alexander Jannaeus. He removed members of the Sanhedrin. We talked about the Sanhedrin being like the Senate, that the Romans had. It was a group of Pharisee leaders or sages, like judges. Sanhedrin, who were Pharisees, and replaced them with Sadducees. This is what John Hyrcanus was doing. He also did away with many of the rabbinic ordinances and replaced them with the ways of the Sadducees and imposing them with a police force and an army. He died in the year 104 BCE. One of his two sons was Alexander Jannaeus, a charismatic, fierce warrior, handsome as the sun, with the equivalent amount of self-confidence to go around. However, he was not the oldest son. All right. That was Judah Aristobulus. Judah the Maccabee, named after Judah the Maccabee. Nice and soft-spoken. He married Salome Alexandra. Her brother was Rabbi Simon, son of Shattat, who was not only king, but according to ancient Jewish law, he had the obligation to marry the widowed wife of the leader of the Pharisees, and not about to let Jewish people go under for the next 30 years. In fact, he will fight the battle for the preservation of the Jewish people at a great personal risk. Judah Aristobulus succeeded to the throne and had his brother arrested and put in prison. Okay. However, he became ill a year later and died. Again, when these two, when it end up being two, a lot of times they want one brother to be priest, one brother to be king, and sometimes it'll end up breaking out into a civil war. That's what we're talking about. This thing, a lot of civil wars breaking out over this leadership, just like what happened with David and his sons. When I want to say it was Absalom who kind of was like, nah, I'm finna take this thing over. It ain't going to nobody else, man. Once David couldn't do nothing, he seen David wouldn't touch that young maiden. He was like, nah, it's over for that boy. I'm taking over now. It's like some Game of Thrones stuff that's going on here. Aristobulus succeeded to the throne and had his brother arrested and put in prison. However, he became ill a year later and died. In one day, Alexander Jannaeus went from the prison to the throne. Okay. Moreover, according to Jewish law, he had the obligation to marry the widow. Marry the widowed wife of his childless brother. All right, same brother that put him in prison. He dies, and now he has to marry his wife Salome, which he fulfilled, and thus Salome became his queen. In actuality, it was politically expedient move for him, because it legitimized his claim to the kingship and averted civil war. He was now officially installed as king and high priest. Until his time, even though the Hasmoneans served as both king and high priest, they were sensitive to the problems raised thereby. Publicly, they went out their way to avoid calling themselves kings, even though for all intents and purposes they were. However, Alexander Jannaeus had no such inhibitions. Shalakia. One of the first things he did was to make a godly crown and make sure to wear it at all times. He had no problem with that. A lot of people are kind of sensitive. I ain't really the king. I'm really the priest, but not him. He was like, no. And he made himself a crown. Besides the great warrior Alexander, Jannaeus was a cunning politician. He needed it because the region was in a very volatile state, even from the Middle East. He took advantage of the turmoil to build an empire for the Jewish people. The first decade and a half of his reign were years of endless war. First, he pushed back the Nabateans. You need to know who the Nabateans are. He pushed back the Nabateans in the south. Then he conquered the entire Gaza Strip, which he populated with Jews. Okay. Once he conquered that area, he repopulated it with Jews. Again, at Acts 2, you've seen these Jews coming from all these different locations. He also conquered virtually every coastal city except Ascalon, which remained in Greek hands. North of Ascalon till what is today Haifa, was likewise controlled by Jewish state, with the exception of Caesarea. Again, brothers who make the claim of Cornelius being an Israelite because he was in Caesarea. Israel did not control Caesarea. Caesarea was controlled by Rome, where a Roman legion was stationed. To the north of Jerusalem, he conquered Golan and established Jewish settlements there, which lasted continuously for almost 600 years. In the east, he conquered most of what is today Jordan. Jewish control was on both sides of the Jordan River. He was also the first one to fortify the fortress of Masada. He lost a few wars along the way too and came close to a complete annihilation. However, he was wildly clever and strong-minded person. It took time, but eventually he carved out a small Jewish empire in the region. All right, this is 1st century before Christ gets here. 100 years before Christ. While he was unpopular, despite the military success, he was unpopular among the Pharisees, who represented the majority of the people. First, he was a coarse, arrogant person. Second, his campaign led a lot of spilled Jewish blood. In Sparta or Rome, parents expected their children to die in battle. Indeed, that was the highest honor. Spartans would give a son a shield and say, come back with it or own it. However, Jews did not share that value. The constant drain both in money and blood made Alexander Jannaeus very unpopular among the masses. Another reason for his unpopularity was that in order to pursue the war, he brought in many non-Jewish mercenaries. All right, to do all of this conquering, he was hiring mercenaries to help him conquer some of these other areas. This was common in the ancient world. The abundance of these mercenary soldiers in the land of Israel had a demoralizing effect because with the foreign soldiers came the foreign gods and foreign behaviors. Thirdly, the Idumeans, who had been converted forcefully against the will of the rabbinic authorities, as we discussed, began to rise in the ranks and became the officer class in the Jewish army. A lot of Idumeans end up becoming the main leaders in the Jewish army. I want to say millions, it's either hundreds of thousands or millions. Josephus says Idumeans died fighting in that war against the Romans in 70 AD. Y'all look that up. Just a quick you just put that into the search bar and put the AI. Somebody put it in the comments. How many Idumeans died during the Jewish Roman war? Thus, the Hasmonean army had a disproportionate amount of Idumeans in positions of leadership. All of this brought about a great deal of negativism in Jewish society, and especially from the Pharisees, led by Simon, son of Shatta, who was not bashful to tell Alexander Jannaeus that he was wrong. Because of that, he slowly but surely became an enemy of the Pharisees. He felt that they were the spearhead of the group who did not love him. Everyone wants to be loved, even a ruler. Situations comes to head. It says there were we almost about here. It says there were a number of matters that brought the situation to a head. The most horrific example took place on Sukkot tabernacles. On the pilgrimage festivals, when hundreds of thousands of Jews from all over the land flocked to Jerusalem to fill the temple courtyard. During the height of the most joyous part of the festival, Alexander Jannaeus, as the high priest, performed a key part of the ceremony in an openly Sadducee way. It was an intentionally provocative public declaration on behalf of the Sadducees. He well knew that his audience was overwhelmingly made up of Pharisees. They responded by pelting him with the citron fruits used as part of the observation of the festival. In his wrath, he ordered his non-Jewish mercenary soldiers into the temple to slaughter at will and butcher 6,000 Jews. Okay, in his wrath, because they start throwing fruit at him. In his wrath, he ordered non-Jewish mercenary soldiers into the temple to butcher 6,000 Jews. Josephus, in reaccounting it more than a century and a half later, recounts how the troughs in the temple ran red with blood. Uncivil war. It was now open civil war because he did that. All right, and this is that because he was aligned with the Sadducees, and felt that the Pharisees, who could kind of had majority of the people on their side, hated him. And so, he tried to flex his muscle. And it ended up backfiring on him. Alexander Jannaeus attempted to arrest the last of the Pharisee leaders. Most escaped. However, those he caught were often executed via crucifixion. All right, which he learned from the Romans. All right, he's out here now killing all the Pharisees. He's trying to kill all of them. In one incident, he nailed 800 people to crucifixes in one day. Along the road outside Jerusalem, and slew their wives and children in front of them as they slowly died on the crucifix. He invited those folks' family. He invited the people, the families there, acting like he finna feed them a dinner, and killed them while they watched their darn husbands die on the darn crucifix. And now they dying and they watching their family members get killed. That's what we doing to each other. Desperate, the Pharisees appealed to Demetrius, a leader in the Syrian Greeks. Now, like, Pharisees are desperate, and now they know the Sadducees is linked up with the darn Romans. They trying to get up with the Greeks. They looking for help from the Greeks to help them defeat Alexander Jannaeus. He was only too happy to comply. Demetrius' army defeated the Jewish army. However, his army had battalions of Jewish soldiers in their ranks. All right, so this Greek army had battalions of Jewish soldiers, because we were that's what he was saying, that so we had mercenaries and we had foreigners in our army, and then we were hiring non-Jewish mercenary groups. Microphone acted crazy, y'all. Let me just get through this thing. So they hired other non-mercenary groups, non-Jewish mercenary groups, to help them fight. I got an echo in here. That's I tried to lower it down, but I still hear it. It made me lose my train of thought. But okay, so we see the Pharisees. Now they've hired this Greek leader Demetrius to help them fight against Alexander Jannaeus and his Jewish army, the Jews, to help them fight against the Jews. It's crazy. But the issue came about because even the Syrian Greeks leader, he had a battalion of Jewish soldiers in their ranks. And when they began to march toward Jerusalem, the Jewish soldiers deserted. They no longer wanted to fight their brethren and be a part of sacking of Jerusalem. Demetrius, in turn, decided to withdraw. The compromise. Nevertheless, it was sobering effect on Alexander Jannaeus. After all, he was still a descendant of the great Hasmonean family who had sacrificed so much for the Jewish people. He saw the debacle he caused and calls for a truce with the Pharisees. Through the efforts of his wife, Queen Salome, both sides came to a compromise. Alexander Jannaeus would run the government, but the Pharisees would run the people. He would take care of the secular matters, and they would take care of the religious matters. Rabbi Simon, son of Shattat, came out of the hiding thanks to the urging of his sister, the queen. He took over the Sanhedrin and promptly kicked out all Sadducees. He also went out them out of the priesthood. Mostly importantly, the educational system of the country returned to the hands of the Pharisees. Alexander Jannaeus made peace with all of that. In the last 10 years in his life, the Jewish kingdom was the largest it had been since the time of Solomon. The economy and the religious life of the people were strong. It was a golden age, albeit only for 10 years. Though they would last for another 200 years, the Sadducees would never again reach the position of influence power that they enjoyed under the early years of Alexander Jannaeus. He died in the year 76 BC. On his deathbed, quoted him saying, "Neither Pharisee nor Sadducee fear only hypocrites, those who have behaved like Shimri and yet want to be rewarded like Pincus." That's Phineas. Thus were people who had an external piety, but who did not live up to the image they protected outwardly. And that's ironic that the Pharisees, that Christ is, saying this about the Pharisees. But again, this is a non-messianic source here, so we got to chew the meat, spit out the bones, but that's ironic. The prospect of another civil war. He left two young children heirs, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. The Pharisees pressed upon Salome to take charge, which she did. All right. So again, you had two new sons, named after Aristobulus. This is Aristobulus II. This is Hyrcanus II. Aristobulus was more like his father, an aggressive warrior, and a strong believer in Greek culture. Salome was afraid that if he became king, he would lead the Jewish people astray, align himself with the Pharisees, and initiate and replay the whole civil war. In order to avoid that, at least temporarily, Salome agreed to become queen. She appointed Hyrcanus the high priest and gave Aristobulus a few fortified cities. Hey man, you take those cities over there. I'm gonna make your brother here. I'm gonna make him high priest, and I'm gonna run this thing. This is the queen stepping up. However, Aristobulus further fortified the cities, trained a militia, and waited for his mother to die. And when she died in the year 67 BC, after ruling for 9 years, she was mourned by the entire populace, not only for her greatness, which was authentic. She was genuinely pious, intelligent, and righteous, but because they knew what was coming next, a civil war between the two brothers. As bloody as this civil war will be, it will include something even worse: the arrival of Rome in Jewish affairs. A combination of the name Shalom and Zion. Well, these are just some footnotes here. But this civil war between these two brothers, which we'll get into in the next the next video. This will cause Rome to get involved. Okay, now we already see now we got the Idumeans. They heavy within the military ranks. And we see, we see the queen having to step in, Alexander Jannaeus. A civil war breaks out with him. A compromise happens with the Pharisees and Sadducees. Everything try to get back in order. Queen Salome, you can look her up. She brought everything back and let the Pharisees bring back the Torah. We was back in Torah observance. We was back, back in righteousness almost, but she once she died, and she made one son, and she couldn't even trust them two sons. That's just crazy. And the people don't even trust them. Imagine the people, Israel don't even let your sons. Why don't you lead us? You lead us. And she makes one son the high priest, the other son gives him some cities, and he's salty. Aristobulus is salty. And, again, he's the one that kind of like his father that kind of leaned with the Pharisees, with the Sadducees. So he waited, and he was just building up a militia that we gonna come in and we gonna take this thing over. And that's where we at this point, y'all. I pray this thing was edifying. Y'all be blessed. We'll see y'all on the next one. Shalom.